This episode of the Healthy Project podcast is sponsored by Iowa Immunizes. Iowa Immunizes is a pivotal coalition spearheaded by dedicated individuals and organizations across Iowa, united by a singular mission to bolster immunization rates across the state, ensuring every Iowan, regardless of age, has access to life-saving vaccines. To learn more about Iowa Immunizes, please go to their website at www.iowaimmunizes.org. Now, let's get into the show. You are listening to the Healthy Project podcast with your host, Corey Dion Lewis. For more, go to healthyprojectpodcast.com. Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Healthy Project podcast. I am your host, Corey Dion Lewis, and I have, I said before we started recording, probably one of the busiest Black women in healthcare right now. My dear friend and just a great person, Dr. BCW, here with me today. Dr. BCW, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Corey, thank you for just the invitation, and it is just wonderful to see you. And I'm just grateful for our friendship.
Yeah, so as am I. And today, something that I would love to get your thoughts on. It's been a while since 2020, in the thick of the pandemic, and vaccines have been such a topic lately, as it never really used to be, but like as COVID and the pandemic, the vaccine has been a topic. But I really wanted to talk about why it's important, specifically for our vulnerable populations. But before we get into that, who are considered, in your opinion, vulnerable populations when it comes to infectious disease, and why is vaccination particularly important for these groups?
Well, when I think of those that are underserved, we hear those labeling, those associations. I personally like to think of it as those who have been historically excluded, those who have been historically marginalized. And so whether it's infectious disease, whether it's maternal health, all of these areas, we know that the ongoing divide and widening of inequities and disparities for these groups is consistent, universal through all areas of healthcare. And the reason why, I mean, there's multiple reasons why, but we have to also look at, number one, mistrust. We have to look at bias that is associated, and as well as just racism that is really part of the infrastructure. And so those are barriers that continue to add to this divide. And so when we're trying to provide health to those who've been historically excluded, it's important to be intentional and think about those areas of how you can first acknowledge it, because that part is always so important, and then build on how you can start to have offerings or literacy or different access points that is really filled with health and really trying to help those communities. And I say that very intentionally because there's always, you hear about these things like, oh, we're going to this community, we're going to provide all of this help. Well, did you ask them first what they wanted? Did you introduce yourself, and did you think about what has been happening in that area before you even showed up? So those are just some of the pieces that we have to take note.
Man, intentionality is so overlooked, but so necessary when trying to bring care to marginalized communities, as you spoke about. So true. And with COVID-19, the pandemic, it has highlighted the importance of vaccination. And from your experience, what lessons have we learned about community health and vaccination during this time?
We have learned that we have been missing the mark, even from before the pandemic, as far as how do we connect with patients in a way that they feel trust in what we're trying to share? How do we uncouple this really complexity that is a part of medicine that shouldn't be a part of medicine? Because for me, as you know, like delivering healthcare in a way that's digestible, engaging, and informative, but really rooted in the patient's health journey. And so we realize during the pandemic we were already at a disadvantage and we had to try our best to
Mm,
catch up. And so we identified that if we can really invest in literacy, invest in what those communities would like to have, that you can make headway. The concern is we were starting to make a little bit of headway. And then once the pandemic, ended, it almost seems like it has stopped that piece of what can we do to really be a part of this community or deliver the best healthcare possible. And so what I'm seeing personally is I see an increase in that gap because now we were making headway and then now healthcare is so polarizing. I think that divide unfortunately has gotten larger than from
mm,
before. And so my goal is to, what can we do? Because that's the biggest thing for me. You hear about people advocating and raising awareness, which is so important. But I like to think about what can I do for that patient in that moment with whatever they're facing. And so I hope, because I'm a positive person, that we
mhm.
can really think about what can we do moving forward.
Right. You know, and I posed this question to Dr. John White earlier, and is regarding misinformation. As we know, there is a lot of information that people have just quick access to. But how did you combat misinformation, especially during this time of social media, with people coming to you with questions about the vaccine?
Well, you know how I mentioned where we have to start from the jump and have this
Yeah.
like playbook of trust and authenticity. And so when the pandemic hit, I was already part of communities. I'm a practicing physician seeing those communities. And so I thought about how can I scale and share health literacy in a more broad manner. And so my series, which Beyond Clinical Walls, Dr.
Hmm.
BCW, really took off even more. It was already there for people, and they knew that not only do you see me on social media, do you see me on television or writing, you also know that I'm seeing that I see patients.
Yeah.
And so that full circle is so important. And for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to see what I can do to get even more content out. And, so I write all of my content and try my best to think about if it's vaccines, if it's any health topic, how can I really deliver the information in a way that anybody can understand and then think about themselves or a loved one that may be dealing with something that I'm talking about, and then what can they do? And so having it available on all platforms so people can choose and look and see, what things that might be of concern is so important. And so when the pandemic hit, they were able to even have more information, but that trust was already set in the work that I'm doing. And as you know, being invested in my work as far as being a doctor that is really just so grateful to serve my patients, my
Hmm.
community, started with my father, um, and the
Yeah.
work that I was doing. And I think that part is so important. He was a Triple War veteran, William Curry, and I grew up going to events, helping different communities. And I didn't always know what I was there for, but I knew the sense of community and
Right.
helping others was a part of me. And so keeping that at the forefront from the time I entered medicine has helped me serve even more people. So when the pandemic hit, that through line, that blueprint was already there. And I'm just going to continue to grow and try to help as many people as I possibly can.
Yeah. And it shows because y'all She was talking to patients up until we
Yeah.
recorded this podcast.
That is true. And then after that is true. I'm in my scrubs, as Corey knows. And then after this podcast, I am going back to the clinic. And so I think that's important. You know, you and I, we work in healthcare. And when I
Yeah,
say we work in healthcare, we actually work in healthcare and
absolutely.
see patients. And you know, sometimes you see those who are advocating and doing great work, and not discounting that. But I think it's important to look at all of us that are out there that are doing that as well, but also entrenched, or what's a better word? Uh, Woven
Immersed.
and
Yeah,
immersed into what we're talking about, that we're
absolutely.
actually seeing patients.
No,
So
absolutely. That's so true. And Dr. BCW, that brings up kind of a question that I kind of have. We have people like yourself that are not only in healthcare, on the front lines doing the work, but also educating. At this point you're educating the world, right? Like you have that kind of an audience, and you have people like Dr. John White, who had coronavirus in context and does similar things. But there may be a provider that doesn't want to do that. Like, let's just not, that's just not them. Maybe they not saying that they don't want to do it because they don't want to help people, but they just want to help from behind the scenes. What in that context, what is the role of the healthcare provider when battling misinformation, really helping patients when it comes to vaccinations, but they maybe don't want to have kind of to be out there on social media to battle that?
I think the one thing when you are trying to combat, or kind of approach anything in life, you need to know about it. So I think
Mm-hmm.
a big piece is, with all this misinformation, I would say to every clinician out there, try your best to immerse yourself in those different pockets of misinformation, because then you're arming yourself with the information that your patient is going to come in and bring forward. And so when you're on even playing ground, it doesn't mean you have to know all of it, but if you know certain pieces, it really helps you kind of see where that patient may be coming from. And I'll go deeper into that, because if this patient is, oh, my clinician knows about this part, may not know the elements of it, but is aware. And then you can start from a level of non-judgment and say, oh, you might be talking about this. Yes, I read that too. And then lead with open-ended questions of, tell me more why you think this is accurate. Because I think those are tools that any clinician can do. And to your point, you may not want to do social media, you may not want to do all of those things, but what you can do is arm yourself with the information that is out there that your patients are consuming, and then really think about those conversations in your clinic, in your exam room with that patient. And that's a way to make amazing impact in
Mm.
that moment. And you can have that patient leave with, not, you may not agree, but what you do have is a level of respect and acknowledgement, and you've started the conversation.
No, that's real. That's real. So I know we're short on time, so I want to leave you
Yes.
with this question. I know we understand your motivations and that you're a huge advocate. Um, what would you like to share with listeners about the importance of staying vaccinated?
So I think, when we talk about vaccination, and anyone who may have just some concern or worry, all of those things, I would encourage everyone to think about why you have those concerns, and then look into, is this information credible? And then really think about the risk versus benefit for whatever vaccination that you are concerned about. And think about that outcome of, if I didn't take this vaccination, would I be okay with what could happen? And because everyone's health journey is different. And so I
Right.
think if you can invest in yourself and think about and know about all of the information and then make that decision and say, I'm okay with it, then that's fine. But really make sure that you know about it, because, there's so many vaccinations out there that we forget that have helped us get to where we are now. When we talk about polio, when we talk about all of these diseases that were really could have really been really detrimental to our
Mm-hmm.
health system, to the people across the world, and how vaccinations did help. I think that part is an important thing for anyone who's considering vaccination to also consider part of their decision. Because when you know all that information and then you make that decision, that's fine. But really remember the history of certain diseases that could have really that have been eradicated because of vaccinations.
No, that's so real. And we're going to leave with that. Dr. BCW,
Yes.
thank you so much for your time. Quickly, for those that are listening or watching and they want to get to know you more, where can they
Thank
reach
you.
you at?
Thank you, Corey. Well, please take a look at drbcw.com is my website. You can also find my YouTube channel, Beyond Clinical Walls, or on IG and TikTok. My handle is dr_BCW. And I also have a TEDx talk that if anyone is interested in knowing more about maternal health and the statistic that we all know about with Black women dying at the highest rate during childbirth or shortly thereafter, I have a TEDx about it, and I share my personal story of how I almost died. So please check that out. Please share it. But you can check out my series, Beyond Clinical Walls, on all social media platforms. And also LinkedIn is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I love to connect. So thank you, Corey, for just having me on and just for the opportunity to highlight these important topics. I'm grateful.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll make sure I have all of that linked in the description of this episode. Again, Dr. BCW, thank you so much for being here. And everybody, thank you so much for listening to the Healthy Project podcast. I'll holler at you next time.